The Minnesota Vikings lost to the Detroit Lions to fall to 5-1, their first loss of the season. And the Detroit Lions put up 31 points on the Minnesota Vikings defense. So the question that needs to be answered a day following the loss to the Detroit Lions is, was the Minnesota Vikings defense exposed against the Detroit Lions? You look at the scoring drives by the Lions. You look at their touchdown drives. And they scored 4 straight touchdowns in this game after the Vikings went up 10-0. To start the game, the Vikings defense was sensational. A 3-and-out immediately by Detroit. They couldn't get a play off. They had to call timeouts, false starts, struggles. The crowd was into it. And Detroit couldn't get anything going offensively for their first 2 possessions. They didn't score a touchdown in the first quarter. The Vikings were up 10-0. And then everything fell apart for the Minnesota Vikings defense. 4 straight touchdown drives that consisted of 69 yards, 83 yards, 72 yards, and 70 yards. And you look at the stat line in this game by the Detroit Lions, and it's phenomenal. Jared Goff, 22 for 25, 280 yards, 2 touchdowns, 0 picks. He was getting whatever he wanted. 140 passer rating. Jahmyr Gibbs, 15 carries, 116 yards, 2 touchdowns, 7.7 average, a long run of 45 yards that he busted for a touchdown. Amon St. Brown, 8 receptions, 112 yards, 14 average, and 1 touchdown with a long catch of 35 yards. 8 receptions on 8 targets. Amon St. Brown was 100%. There's a few things the Minnesota Vikings particularly struggled with that I noticed throughout this game. 3rd downs. The Vikings could not get off the field on 3rd down. I think it might have been the Detroit Lions' last scoring drive where they scored a touchdown. And they scored a touchdown on 3rd and 6. Stephon Gilmore fell down. But prior to that, they had a couple of 3rd and longs where it's like, you got to get off the field. Get off the field. And they couldn't get off the field. So the Vikings cut it to 4 points, 21-17, after scoring in their opening drive in the 3rd quarter. And then Detroit scores a touchdown, marches right down the field, goes up by double digits. Vikings lose by 2 points. But this is why I believe the Minnesota Vikings defense was not exposed against the Detroit Lions. 1, this is the best offensive team the Minnesota Vikings defense will face all season long. From the beginning of the season to Sunday, and from Sunday to the end of the season, there is no offense as good as the Detroit Lions. There's a reason why their head coach is a very good head coach, but an even bigger reason why that their offensive coordinator, Ben Johnson, will have any head coaching job that's available this offseason to him. Any available head coaching job that he wants is his. And even any potential unavailable head coaching job that he wants, depending on the situation, is his. If a team that already has a head coach, and they're okay, maybe they're not in the hot seat, but if they could guarantee Ben Johnson, they would fire that head coach and sign Ben Johnson, because he is the brightest offensive mind in the NFL. And we saw that time and time again in the Minnesota Vikings loss. So I will not go as far to say that the Minnesota Vikings defense was exposed, because the Detroit Lions are good. And this looked like a playoff game. This looked like two teams going back and forth and competing against one another, scoring points. It looked like a game of runs. It looked like a game of momentum swings. It felt like a playoff atmosphere, a playoff matchup. And the game acted like a playoff game. Vikings get the early run. Then Detroit goes on their run. Then the Vikings went on their run. It went back and forth, back and forth. Adjustment here, adjustment there. The Minnesota Vikings desperately missed Blake Cashman, just like the Detroit Lions missed Aiden Hutchinson. But the Minnesota Vikings corners, Shaq Griffin and Stephon Gilmore, did not have a great day. So improving at that position before the trade deadline would be huge for the Minnesota Vikings secondary. To add a guy that is elite, that can cover one-on-one, that isn't aging, would be a big pickup for the Minnesota Vikings. We'll see if they do that or not. But I will not go as far to say they were exposed against the Lions. However, if this happens again against the Los Angeles Rams on Thursday Night Football in LA, after they only put up 20 points against the Las Vegas Raiders, well, then we might have to change this opinion and say they did get exposed, because Ben Johnson did do some things, particularly in this game, that other teams might borrow in the future against the Minnesota Vikings. For example, Vikings blitzed 7. The Lions only had 6 blockers. Well, they put their receiver in motion, and as the receiver was in motion, they hiked the ball, and they used that receiver as a blocker, which freed up Amon St. Brown in one-on-one coverage and gave Jared Goff all day to throw. And he just went right up the seam. Goff put it to him, and he blew by the Vikings secondary. Easy touchdown. So there were certain things that, if the Minnesota Vikings aren't careful, this could be the game that leads to the exposure for the rest of the season. I'm not going to say they were exposed yet, but maybe I'm wrong, and maybe it was. Thank you for watching this episode. Hit that subscribe button right there. And thank you for making this podcast a part of your day.